Good day. This is Jerry Mayberry with Echosens North America. In this presentation, I'm going to review the myFibroScan mobile application. Before we get started, it would be best if you would download the app to your own mobile device. To do this, go to either the Android App Store or the Apple App Store, search on the term myFibroScan, and download the app. Once you've downloaded the app, you'll enter your account registration information, and then you will receive a confirmation email signaling that your app is ready to use. It would be best if you would do all of this before continuing with my presentation, because it's best if you can follow along with my examples. Let's get started. Within the myFibroScan app, there are two primary functions. There's a fast score calculator and there's an interpretation guide. In this presentation, I'm going to talk about the interpretation guide first. So let's look at the interpretation guide to determine what is available there. So there are three primary functions within the interpretation guide. First, there's a listing of all available peer review threshold publications. It would be very important for the provider to review those available threshold value references and choose the one that they prefer to use for each specific disease etiology. Once that has been done, you'll be equipped to compare your patient's test values to the threshold values listed in your preferred publication. And of course, generate interpretation reports based on those preferences. Let's do an example. So this is what the screen looks like when you open the interpretation guide. Notice that there are blank fields for the CAP score and for the liver stiffness or elasticity score, frequently referred to as VCTE. So you would enter the values into those fields from your FibroScan test. Notice in this example, I've entered 345 decibels per meter is my CAP score example, and I've entered 10.8 kilopascals as my liver stiffness example. Then what I'm going to do is I have to pick what disease etiology does today's patient have. In this example, I will first walk you through NAFLD-NASH. So if we had a patient with suspected fatty liver disease, we would pick the NAFLD-NASH choice, and then we would click Submit, and this tells the application that it should be comparing these two values that we entered from today's FibroScan to the threshold values within fatty liver disease. Then we're going to see a display such as you see here. Notice on the left-hand side, we have for a CAP score of 345, and based on the selection of the publication that's shown at the bottom, which in this case is Eddowes et al. Sensitivity priority, I'll explain that in a moment, this would be an S3 level steatosis grade. On the right-hand side, you can see that based on Eddowes et al. Yoden's index priority as our threshold for liver stiffness, that this would be an F3 based on our patient's test value of 10.8 kilopascals. Now, obviously, all of this depends on which two threshold value publications you have selected within your app, telling it what you want to use, because all the myFibroScan app is doing is comparing your patient's test values to whatever reference publication you selected at the bottom of this screen. So let's talk about what selections are available for threshold value publications and how might you change your preference. So if we click Create Report, what you would see for my example is the following. Notice you have on here the CAP value that you entered, you have the liver stiffness value that you entered, and then you have the graphic displays for the steatosis grade and the fibrosis grade. And notice below those fields, there's an indication on this report, which is a PDF, that states what threshold value you used to make these determinations, because all the application is doing is comparing the thresholds in that publication to your patient's test values and displaying them graphically. Now, how might we change these threshold value references? So let's take a look at how do these references get into the app. An objective process is used to determine what peer review reference threshold value publications you have, and these are the criteria. In order for a study to be available as a reference publication, that study had to be specifically in the disease population that we're talking about, and there has to be a paired biopsy and FibroScan test done on every patient, and they're closely timed together, as closely timed as possible between when the biopsy was done and when the FibroScan was done. All of the fibrosis correlate values, liver stiffness values, had to come directly from FibroScan VCTE. No other technology is comparable. And all of the CAP values had to come from a FibroScan performing the CAP calculation. If all of these criteria are fulfilled, that is a publication that you'll find listed within the myFibroScan app. Echosens does not make decisions on what threshold values you use. All we do is collect all of the properly conducted studies into a single place that's convenient, the myFibroScan app, to empower you to make these decisions and easily interpret your studies. So now let's go back and talk about how we, inside the app, could choose what reference publication you want to be used. So let's focus on, notice that for liver stiffness, we're currently on Eddowes et al., and we're on a Yoden's index. So let me explain what that is. What you see here is if you were to click on that gray area that I was just showing you, you would see all of the available reference publications from which you can choose. If you look in the top here, you'll notice there are two publications. One is Eddowes et al., and the other is Suzuki et al. And those two publications both have multiple priority threshold values. They have sensitivity priority thresholds that emphasize high negative predictive value. They have specificity priority thresholds that emphasize positive predictive value. And then finally, they have a Yoden's index blended priority that is equally blended between sensitivity and specificity. This equips you to choose which of these priorities you want depending on the clinical scenario that you're currently in. As an example, if you were doing FibroScan testing and your objective was to determine, can I rule out a specific level of fibrosis using the VCTE correlate, then you would use a sensitivity priority threshold. I want you to notice, if you look up here, I currently have the app set. Notice the radio button is moved to the right here. I currently have this set to use Eddowes et al. Yoden's index, which means I have it set to use the Eddowes et al. Publication, and I've chosen a blended priority, equally balancing sensitivity and specificity. So you have 6 choices here among those two publications. You would just move the slider to the publication you want the application to use when it interprets your study. At the bottom, you have a choice of 2 different publications where you could choose a publication that has a single VCTE threshold value. These are older publications that don't have the option to prioritize sensitivity versus specificity versus blended. So those are your choices within fatty liver disease, VCTE thresholds. Now let's stay in fatty liver and let's talk about the available CAP thresholds. I want you to notice at the top, you again have the Eddowes et al. Option, and again it has sensitivity, specificity, and blended priority options for the CAP score. If you prefer to use one of the older publications with a single threshold value for CAP, those two publications are listed at the bottom. And again, all you have to do is move the slider adjacent to the threshold publication that you prefer to use for CAP when you're doing fatty liver interpretation. Now let's look at the other disease etiologies. Hepatitis C. If we look at liver stiffness threshold options for Hep C, I want you to notice you have three choices. Again, you would refer to these publications, pick the one that you best prefer, and then you would just move the slider to turn on that specific publication. And in the future, whenever you use the myFibroScan app, it will use that reference publication. In HIV HCV, notice you have two choices. In hepatitis B, you have three choices. In alcoholic liver, three choices. Autoimmune hepatitis, two choices. And primary biliary cholangitis, two. And finally, in pediatrics, two choices. So, in any disease cohort that you're going to be using for making interpretation, just take the time to set these sliders to the publications you refer, and then you'll be ready to start using the app in a very time-efficient manner. Now let's turn to the second function within the myFibroScan app, the FAST score calculator. To calculate the FAST score, you would merely press the FAST score icon, and please appreciate the FAST score is used only in suspected NAFLD-NASH patients. It is not applicable in any other liver disease. It has to be suspected NAFLD-NASH and a patient that received a FibroScan test. So what we're going to do here is we're going to enter our fields again. So the first thing that we would enter is, notice I've entered, just as an example, a liver stiffness score of 10.8 kilopascals. I've entered a CAP score of 345 decibels per meter. And we also did a blood test, and we were able to get the AST value from the blood serum. And in this case, I'm using an example of 68. Those are the three inputs required to calculate the FAST score. Also notice that I have highlighted that I understand and am compliant with the rules for calculating the score, and then I'm going to submit, and then I'm going to see this screen. The FAST score has now been calculated using the FAST score from the publication that you see at the bottom of the screen. Notice that you can see here the values for, you can see the CAP, liver stiffness, and AST values that you entered on the report, and you can see the FAST score which was calculated, which in this case was 0.74. To refer to what this means, please watch my separate presentation on the FAST score, in which I explain the inputs, the formula by which this is calculated, and how to interpret a FAST score. Thank you. I hope you found this presentation to be useful.